Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss the content, type, and form of poetry. Number one, the content of the poem. The content معناه المحتوى. The content of the poem is divided into several points. Number one, the subject matter or the topic اللي هي الفكرة الأساسية في القصيدة. The subject of a poem is the idea or topic that the poem explores. So it's the main idea of the poem. It's the main topic or the main subject of the poem. If the poem is about a certain character, then he or she could be the subject of the poem. And in this case, the character is called the textual subject. يبقى التوبيك دي الفكرة الأساسية، الموضوع الأساسي للقصيدة اللي بتتفرع منه تيمات مختلفة. في بعض الحالات بيكون موضوع القصيدة شخصية، وفي الحالة دي بنسمي الشخصية دي textual subject. Any topic is usually divided into themes. The theme is the underlying message of the text. So it's the message that the author is trying to get across to the reader. It's usually not as clear as a topic. You have to read the text carefully to understand its theme. يبقى التيمة هي الفكرة اللي الكاتب بيحاول يوصلها للقارئ. For example, we can have love as the main topic or the subject matter of a poem. However, the theme could differ from one poet to another. For example, one theme could be that true love lasts forever. Another example would be that love is a lie. A third example would be that the theme of the poem is about unrequited love. So as we can see, we can develop several themes from the main topic. يبقى الفكرة الأساسية أو التوبيك دي اللي هي موضوع القصيدة، اللي هو مثلا زي ما قلنا الحب، تتفرع منه تيمات مختلفة. The theme displays the author's opinion about the subject. So it informs the reader about the author's opinion about the subject. So if the subject of the poem is love and the author's opinion is that love conquers all, then the theme of the poem will be that love conquers all. فالتيمة دايما بتوضح رأي الكاتب عن موضوع القصيدة. يعني في الحالة اللي قدامنا موضوع القصيدة هو الحب، بس هل الكاتب مثلا بيحب حب من طرف واحد، أو شايف إن الحب هو الشعور الأسمى من المشاعر الإنسانية، أو شايف إن الحب عبارة عن كذبة؟ كل دول ممكن يكونوا تيمات متفرعة من موضوع واحد اللي هو الحب. فبكده المحتوى منقسم لجزئين. رقم واحد السبجكت ماتر أو التوبيك، ده اللي هو موضوع القصيدة، ويبقى واضح الموضوع العام للقصيدة، وعادة بتتفرع منه كذا تيمة، والتيمة هي الرسالة اللي الكاتب بيحاول يوصلها للقارئ، وعادة بتعبر عن رأي الكاتب في الموضوع أو التوبيك الخاص بالقصيدة. To understand the content of the poem, you need to read the poem several times quite carefully, and then you will be able to detect the theme and the topic of the poem. Number 3, the diction. The diction refers to the choice of words and their connotations. So we focus on why the poet chose these specific words and the connotations of these words. Are they positive? Are they negative? فالديكشن ده اللي هو اختيار الكلمات، بنركز فيه على اختيار الشاعر للكلمات. اختار الكلمة دي ليه؟ زي ما انتوا عارفين أي كلمة ليها synonyms كتيرة، مرادفات، فاحنا مفروض نركز على ليه الشاعر اختار الكلمة دي بالذات، وإيه هي الكونوتيشنز بتاعت الكلمة. يعني كل كلمة ليها دلالات معينة، فاحنا بنركز على ليه الشاعر اختار الدلالة دي أو الكلمة دي بالذات. And lastly, we focus on the tone of the poem. The tone of the poem refers to the mood implied by an author's word choice and the way that the text can make a reader feel. So the key word here is the mood or the atmosphere of the poem, and this is achieved by the choice of diction. يعني اختيار الكلمات بيأثر على الجو الخاص بالقصيدة، على الانطباع اللي بيوصل للقارئ. The tone could be optimistic, hopeful, cheerful. It could also be sad, somber, dark, it could be satirical or critical, it could also be ironic or humorous. So the tone of the poem is quite important. Moving on to types of poetry أو نوع القصيدة. We have 3 types of poetry. Number 1, lyric poetry اللي هو الشعر الغنائي. In a lyric poem, a single speaker presents a state of mind or an emotional state. So, lyric poetry includes one speaker only, and the speaker presents a state of mind. So, he presents his thoughts to the reader, or an emotional state. He presents his emotions to the reader. فالشعر الغنائي دايما فيه speaker واحد فقط، وعادة بيوضح مشاعر المتحدث ده أو أفكار المتحدث، فده الشعر الغنائي. Number 2, narrative poetry الشعر السردي. A narrative poem tells a story through verse. The key word here is story. A narrative poem must include a story, and it's usually quite long. Narrative poetry is longer than lyric poetry. يبقى الشعر السردي لازم يبقى فيه سرد، بمعنى إن لازم يبقى فيه قصة أو حكاية. And lastly we have dramatic poetry الشعر الدرامي. In a dramatic poem, a dramatic persona addresses a silent audience in a specific situation. So we have a persona. So it's a character that is separate from the poet. And this persona or this character addresses a silent audience. So he is talking to someone. There is a monologue. And he is talking to the audience in a specific dramatic situation. So there is a critical situation, a dramatic situation. He is not just telling us about his feelings or his thoughts. بمعنى إن الشعر الدرامي لازم يبقى فيه كاركتر منفصل عن الكاتب، يعني poetic persona، وعادة بيكلم a silent audience، يعني بيبقى فيه حد سامع لكن ما بيتكلمش جوه القصيدة. فده يعتبر طبعا نوع من أنواع المونولوج اللي عادة برضو بيبقى موجود في مسرحيات، خاصة مثلا مسرحيات ويليام شكسبير، وبيبقى فيه specific situation، بمعنى إن بيبقى فيه موقف درامي معين، مش مجرد إنه واحد واقف وبيقرا لنا أفكاره أو مشاعره، عشان كده اسمه الشعر الدرامي. So these are the 3 types of poetry. Lyric poetry, it deals with the emotions of one single speaker. Narrative poetry, it tells the reader a certain story and is quite long. And dramatic poetry, in this kind of poetry, we are presented with a character who is talking to a silent audience in a specific dramatic situation. Let's talk more about lyric poetry. Lyric poetry أو الشعر الغنائي عبارة عن إيه؟ A lyric was a song sung to the accompaniment of a lyre. As you can see, this is the lyre. And a lyric means a song that is sung when someone is playing the lyre. يبقى lyric جاية من كلمة lyre اللي هي القيثارة، وعادة كانت أغنية. Let's see the dictionary meaning of lyric poetry. According to the concise Oxford Dictionary of Literary Terms, a lyric poem is any fairly short poem expressing the personal mood, feeling, or meditation of a single speaker. So we need to pay attention to the key words in this definition. It's a short poem, it can be long, and it expresses the personal mood or the personal ideas of a single speaker. فكده الشعر الغنائي سمي بالشعر الغنائي لأن زي ما قلنا هو كان عبارة عن أغنية زمان، أغنية بيتم غنائها على أنغام القيثارة، ولازم المتحدث يكون متحدث واحد فقط، والقصيدة عادة قصيرة وبتعبر عن مشاعر أو أفكار المتحدث، ما بتحكيلناش مثلا حكاية زي narrative poetry. Lyric poetry is divided into several types. Number 1, the sonnet، واللي هي بالعربي برضو اسمها السونت أو السوناتا. A sonnet is a 14-line poem with a fixed rhyme scheme. So a sonnet has to include 14 lines, and it has a fixed rhyme scheme. This means that the rhyme scheme doesn't change. عبارة عن قصيدة بتتكون من 14 سطر وليها قافية ثابتة. Number 2, Elegy. Elegy اللي هي المرسية، قصيدة فيها رثاء. It's a poem of serious reflection, usually a lament for the dead. So it's a poem about a serious topic, and usually this topic is a lament for the dead, someone who is mourning someone who died. يبقى دي قصيدة رثاء. And lastly, we have the ode. An ode is a lyric poem with a serious subject. So the topic is serious. It could be a praise for a certain individual, or it could be about nature, or it could be about some certain abstract idea. And it's written in an elevated or formal style. Most odes are written to praise a certain individual, and the style is usually formal. فالأود عادة بتبقى قصيدة مدح في شخص معين. ممكن برضو تبقى قصيدة بتعبر عن أفكار الشاعر، بس موضوع القصيدة ما بيبقاش مثلا عن الحب أو الحاجات المنتشرة في الليريك بويتري، لا بيبقى عن حاجة سيريس شوية، يعني مثلا الطبيعة أو ممكن فلسفة في الحياة أو هكذا. So these are the most common types of lyric poetry: the sonnet, the elegy, and the ode. Let's talk more about the sonnet, because the sonnet is the most commonly used form of lyric poetry. The word sonnet is derived from the Italian word sonetto, which means little song. A sonnet is a lyric poem comprising 14 rhyming lines of equal length. So it has to include 14 lines, and they should all be of equal length. And in English literature, usually the sonnet is written in iambic pentameter. بمعنى إن السوناتا عبارة عن قصيدة من 14 سطر وليها بحر شعري معين. البحر ده اسمه iambic pentameter. And we will discuss the iambic pentameter in the form of the poem. الiambic pentameter ده يعتبر بحر شعري وهيبقى موجود تحت جزء الإيقاع في القصيدة. The sonnet originated in Italy, and it was established by the Italian scholar Francesco Petrarch in the 14th century as a major form of love poetry. So the sonnet first appeared in Italy, and the Italian scholar Francesco Petrarch was the first one to introduce this form of poetry, and it was introduced in the 14th century as a major form of love poetry. يبقى بكده السوناتا ظهرت في إيطاليا في القرن ال14، واللي قدمها كان العالم والكاتب والشاعر فرانسيسكو بيترارك، وكان عادة التوبيك أو السبجكت ماتر بتاعها أو الموضوع الأساسي هو الحب. طيب مين قدمها في الشعر الإنجليزي؟ The sonnet became popular in England in the Renaissance when Thomas White and Henry Howard translated and imitated the sonnets written by Francesco Petrarch. So it appeared around the 16th century in England during the Renaissance. It was introduced by these two poets, Thomas White and Henry Howard. They first translated Petrarch's sonnets, and they liked the format of the sonnets, so they began to imitate them. They began to write using this format. And so the English sonnet was introduced in English literature. يبقى السوناتا ظهرت في إنجلترا في عصر النهضة أو الرينيسانس، واللي قدم السونيتات في الشعر الإنجليزي كانوا الشاعرين اللي قدامكم دول توماس وايت وهنري هاورد. أول حاجة هم ترجموا السونيتات الخاصة بفرانسيسكو بيترارك، وبعد كده بدأوا يقلدوا الشكل بتاعها لحد ما الشكل بدأ يبقى ثابت في الشعر الإنجليزي وظهرت الإنجليش سونيت. The sonnet is divided into 3 types. Number 1, the Petrarchan sonnet. It's named after Francisco Petrarch. Number 2, the Shakespearean sonnet. It's named after William Shakespeare. And number 3, the Spencerian sonnet is named after Edmund Spenser. So the Petrarchan sonnet is of course an Italian sonnet. The Shakespearean sonnet is an English sonnet, and the Spencerian sonnet is a variation of the English sonnet. So it's the same as the English sonnet, but it includes some variations, some changes in the rhyme scheme. هي بتختلف عن الشكسبيريان sonnet في القافية. The division, التقسيمة. The Petrarchan sonnet is divided into an octave and a sestet. The octave is a stanza of 8 lines, and the sestet is a stanza of 6 lines. يبقى الأوكتاف ده عبارة عن مقطع شعري. مقطع شعري يعني مجموعة أبيات، والأوكتاف عبارة عن 8 أبيات. أما السيستت فهو مقطع شعري عبارة عن 6 أبيات. بكده لو جمعناهم مع بعض هيبقوا 14 سطر، وزي ما قلنا إن السونت لازم تبقى 14 سطر. The Shakespearean sonnet consists of 3 quatrains and a couplet. A quatrain is a stanza made up of 4 lines, and a couplet is a stanza of 2 lines. So 3 by 4 plus 2 equals 14 lines. The Spencerian sonnet has the same division as the Shakespearean sonnet. It consists of 3 quatrains and a couplet. يبقى Shakespearean و Spencerian sonnets متقسمين ل 3 quatrains and a couplet. والquatrain عبارة عن مقطع شعري مكون من 4 أسطر، والcouplet اللي هو سطرين، مقطع شعري عبارة عن سطرين. فهنضرب 3 في 4 زائد 2 هيبقوا برضو 14 سطر. يبقى كلهم 14 سطر، لأن أي سونت بتبقى 14 سطر. اللي هيفرق التقسيمة ما بين كل مقطع والتاني بيبقى فيه مسافة، فهنا مقطعين فقط، هنا هيبقى 4 مقاطع. The rhyme scheme أو القافية. The rhyme scheme of the Petrarchan sonnet is ABBA, ABBA, CDE, CDE, or ABBA, ABBA, CDC, DCD. This means that the octave has a fixed rhyme scheme, which is ABBA, ABBA, while the sestet might vary or change from one poem to another. It could either be CDE, CDE, or CDC, DCD. يبقى rhyme scheme أو القافية، ودي لسه هنتكلم عنها قدام في الفيديو، اللي هي بتوضح لنا القافية الخاصة بكل سطر، بتبقى ثابتة. في الأوكتاف اللي هو المقطع المكون من 8 أسطر بتبقى ثابتة دايما. أما السستت المقطع المكون من 6 أسطر فممكن تتغير من قصيدة للتانية، إما CDE CDE أو CDC DCD. The Shakespearean sonnet has a fixed rhyme scheme ABAB, CDCD, EFEF, GG. So as we can see, each quatrain has a certain rhyme scheme. يعني السطر الأول والتالت من quatrain 1، والسطر التاني والرابع من quatrain 1 ليهم نفس القافية. نفس الكلام بينطبق على quatrain number 2، السطر الأول والتالت C C، والسطر التاني والرابع D D. ونفس الكلام بينطبق على مقطع التالت. وأخيرا الرايمين كابلت اللي هم آخر سطرين بيبقى ليهم نفس القافية. The Spencerian sonnet has a rhyme scheme that is similar to the Shakespearean sonnet. The first quatrain has the same rhyme scheme as the Shakespearean sonnet, AB, AB. And then we have some slight modifications or variations, BC, BC, CD, CD, and then a rhyming couplet, EE. If you pay attention, you will find that Edmund Spenser uses the last rhyme of each quatrain and begins the other quatrain with it. So here we have AB, AB, and then he used the same rhyme scheme, which is B, to begin his second quatrain, which is BC, BC. Then he used the last rhyme scheme, C, to begin his third quatrain. And then he has rhyming couplet. فكده السونت الخاصة بإدموند سبنسر تعتبر قريبة جدا من ويليام شكسبير. هم مستخدمين نفس القافية في المقطع الأول، لكن زي ما قلنا هو بياخد قافية آخر سطر في المقطع وبيبدأ بيه المقطع التاني. يعني السطر الأخير من أول مقطع بتبقى ليه نفس قافية السطر الأول من المقطع الجاي، وهكذا لحد ما يوصل للرايمين كابلت. Then we move to the division of stanzas. The Petrarchan sonnet is divided into an octave and a sestet. So the poem is written in 2 parts, an octave and a sestet, while the Shakespearean and the Spencerian sonnets are written as one stanza. They are divided into 3 quatrains and a couplet, but they are all written as one stanza. There is no space between them. على الرغم من إن الشكسبيريان والسبنسيريان sonnets متقسمة، بمعنى إن كل 4 تستر بيتكلموا مثلًا عن تيمة معينة أو مربوطين ببعض ليهم قافية معينة، إلا إنهم مكتوبين في الآخر كقصيدة واحدة بدون تقسيمة، بدون مسافة ما بين كل مقطع شعري والتاني. أما Petrarchan sonnet فلازم تبقى متقسمة لoctave وsestet. Moving on to the last thing, which is the volta with the poetic turn. A volta is a poetic turn, a shift in theme or tone, so you can feel that something has changed in the poem. The poet makes a shift in his theme or his tone. فهي عبارة عن تغيير بسيط. يعني مثلا ممكن الشاعر يكون مبسوط في كل الأبيات ويجي عند آخر بيتين ويبقى فيه نبرة حزن، أو يبقى ماشي بفكرة معينة وبعد كده يغير رأيه في آخر كام بيت. طب التغيير ده بيحصل فين أو poetic turn ده بيحصل فين؟ In the Petrarchan sonnet the volta occurs between the octave and the sestet, and in the Shakespearean and Spencerian sonnets the volta occurs before the couplet. Sometimes the volta is not that clear, so it's okay if you can't find the volta in a sonnet. But if there's a volta, it usually occurs either between the octave or the sestet or right before the couplet. فما نستغربش لو في sonnet الفولتا فيها مش واضحة، خاصة إن الشكسبيريان sonnet مثلا ما كانش بيحصل فيها shift in theme or tone، لكن عادة كان بيحصل فيها زي conclusion للبويم كلها أو اختصار للفكرة الأساسية للقصيدة. It's okay if you can't find the volta. So this picture illustrates the differences between these three sonnets. As you can see, the Shakespearean and Spencerian sonnets are quite similar. The only difference is in the rhyme scheme. الموضوع ده هيبقى واضح أكتر لو دخلنا على جوجل وبكل بساطة شفنا example لكل قصيدة، يعني شفنا الرايم سكيم، التقسيمة بتاعتها، القافية ماشية ازاي، البويتك تيرن حصل فين. Moving on to narrative poetry أو الشعر السردي. Narrative poetry is divided into several types. Number one, the epic. An epic poem is a lengthy narrative poem that details the extraordinary feats of a heroic character. So it's a long poem and it describes the heroic deeds of a certain character, a hero. A great example of epic poetry would be Homer's The Iliad or Homer's The Odyssey. فالإبك هو الشعر الملحمي زي الإلياذة اللي هي تعتبر ملحمة حرب ترودا، فدي قصيدة ملحمية، قصيدة بتدور أحداثها حوالين بطل معين. يعني فلنفترض لو خدنا مثلا هيركليز، دي تعتبر قصة ملحمية. Number two, mock epic. A mock epic is a satiric poem that adapts the elevated heroic style of the classical epic poem to a trivial subject. What does mock mean? Mock means to make fun of someone or something. So the mock epic makes fun of the epic poem. It's a satiric poem and it uses the elevated heroic style of the classical epic poem. So it uses the formal style, the elevated language, and it adapts it to a trivial subject. So the mock epic is usually about something that is trivial, something that is not important, and yet the poet describes it in a formal and elevated style. So he is mocking it, he's making fun of it. فالموك إبك بكل بساطة قصيدة ساخرة بتستخدم نفس أسلوب الإبك أو قصيدة ملحمية اللي طبعا الستايل بتاعها بيبقى نوعا ما فورمال وبتطبقه على موضوع تافه. فالقصيدة طبعا بتبقى ساخرة لأن ما ينفعش نستخدم الستايل ده مع موضوع تافه أو حاجة مش مهمة. And lastly we have the ballad. The ballad اللي هو الشعر الشعبي. It's a form of folk poetry, often a narrative set to music. So as you know, long ballads were usually sung by bards. A bard is someone who goes from one town to another and sings songs or poems about stories. So it was a form of entertainment in the old days, and it was usually accompanied by music. ده كان منتشر كنوع من أنواع الفنون، إن بيبقى فيه شخص اللي هو the bard وكان عادة بيتجول من قرية لتانية ويبدأ يحكي القصص في شكل أغنية. So we have the folk ballad which is a type of ballad that includes a narrative and it's often accompanied by music. And the narrative is usually about some adventures. And we have another kind of ballad, and it's called the lyrical ballad. A lyrical ballad is not set to music, it's a literary ballad. It's not a form of folk poetry. It's a form of poetry that was pioneered by the Romantic poets, and it focused on everyday life, on nature, on emotions, so it was quite different from the folk ballad. يبقى مهم نعرف إن في نوعين من الشعر الشعبي. في الشعر الشعبي المتداول اللي هو عادة كان بيتم تداوله من غير كتابة وكانت بتصحبه الموسيقى، وفي نوع تاني من الشعر الشعبي أو من البالد اللي هو الليريكال بالد أو الليتري بالد، ده اللي هو بيبقى مكتوب وبيبقى مختلف نوعا ما عن الفولك بالد، وده ظهر في فترة الشعر الرومانسي أو المدرسة الرومانسية. So you need to read more about the difference between the folk ballad and the literary ballad. Lastly, we move on to dramatic poetry أو الشعر الدرامي. Dramatic poetry or dramatic monologue is a poem in which a speaker who is explicitly someone other than the author, so it's a poetic persona, makes a speech to a silent audience in a specific situation and at a critical moment. So it's a dramatic monologue because there is a character who is talking to a silent audience, and this character is in a specific situation. There is something dramatic happening. He's not just telling us about his feelings. No, there is some kind of a dramatic situation that's happening. dramatic monologue ده لازم يكون فيه شخص اللي هو ملوش علاقة خالص بالبويت، يبقى متحدث عارفين ان ده كاركتر معين وان في situation معينة بتحصل، حاجة درامية، وهو بيتكلم عن السيتويشن دي، لكن مش مجرد شخص بيحكي لنا عن المشاعر بتاعته أو الأفكار بتاعته. Moving on to the form of the poem أو شكل القصيدة. Number one, the rhythm of the poem. الرhythm اللي هو الإيقاع. The rhythm of the poem is the entire movement or flow of the poem as affected by rhyme, stress, diction, and organization. So it's how the poem is flowing, how the rhymes, the diction, the division of the poem is organized to present the poem as a whole. فالإيقاع بتاع القصيدة اللي هو البحر الشعري اللي هي بتنتمي ليه. إيه هو طول السطر الشعري؟ إيه الحاجات اللي بنحط عليها ستريس وإيه الحاجات اللي بنحطش عليها ستريس؟ وده كله هيوضح لما ناخد الريزم بالتفصيل. Number two, the rhyme scheme أو القافية. The rhyme scheme is the pattern of rhyme that comes at the end of each verse or line in poetry. So it refers to the last word in each line and how it rhymes with another line. فالرايم scheme بكل بساطة هو القافية، إن الكلمة الأخيرة في السطر تكون ليها نفس القافية الخاصة بكلمة تانية في آخر سطر تاني، وده برضو مش هيوضح إلا لما ناخد مثال ونشرح الرايم scheme قدام في الفيديو. Number three, the stanzaic structure or how the stanzas are divided. يبقى تقسيمة المقاطع الشعرية. A stanza is a group of lines forming the basic recurring metrical unit in a poem. So a stanza is simply a group of lines, and after each stanza we usually leave a space before we start the next stanza. So it's similar to using paragraphs in an essay. Instead of using paragraphs, we use stanzas. يبقى stanza هي المقطع الشعري، يعني مجموعة من الأبيات عادة بيبقوا منفصلين عن الأبيات التانية بمسافة. Number four, the sound devices أو اللي هي المظاهر الجمالية الصوتية. The sound devices refer to the use of specific vowels, consonants, and accents that make up the sound of the poem. So we focus on the words that have similar vowels or consonants or similar accents, and we start to analyze them. And lastly, we have the stylistic devices. These devices have to do with the style of the poem. Stylistic devices refer to techniques that are related to the structure of the poem, to the style of the poem. So, for instance, if a poet uses negation throughout the poem, this can be considered a stylistic device. فstylistic devices ليها علاقة بالستايل الخاص بالشعر، طريقة الكتابة، مثلا استخدم نفي، استخدم تقديم وتأخير، وهكذا. So number one, the rhythm. The rhythm قلنا إيقاع القصيدة. إيقاع القصيدة يعني إيه؟ عبارة عن حاجتين. Number one, the foot. The foot معناه التفعيلة. The foot is the arrangement of stressed and unstressed syllables of each line. So each line of poetry is comprised of words, and each word is comprised of stressed or unstressed syllables. And there are several types of the arrangement of stressed and unstressed syllables, and we are going to discuss them in this lecture. So the foot is the arrangement of stressed and unstressed syllables. بمعنى إن التفعيلة بنركز فيها على المقاطع اللي جوه الكلمات، المقطع الصوتي اللي جوه الكلمات، وهل هو stressed أو unstressed. stressed يعني أنا بحط stress عليه وأنا بتكلم. unstressed يعني ما بحطش stress عليه وأنا بتكلم، وده لسه هيوضح قدام في الفيديو. And number two, the meter or the line length. The meter is the line length. How long the line is, how many feet are included in the line. يبقى الميتر هو طول السطر الشعري. So it's number of feet in every line of poetry. So the difficult part here is the foot. It's more difficult to determine than the meter. In order to determine the meter of the poem, you will just have to count the feet in every line. But first, you have to determine the foot in each poem. يبقى الإيقاع عبارة عن التفعيلة وطول السطر الشعري. وطول السطر الشعري هيتم تحديده من خلال عدد الفيت الموجودة في السطر الشعري. طبعا ده مش هيوضح إلا عن طريق أمثلة، فخلونا ندخل دلوقتي في التفاصيل بتاعة الفيت والميتر. Before we move on to the foot and the meter, we need to understand what a syllable is. A syllable is a unit of pronunciation having one vowel sound with or without surrounding consonants, forming the whole or a part of a word. So a syllable has to do with how we transcribe a word. In order to provide a phonetic transcription of a word, we need to write the vowels and the consonants that make up this word. And we need to count the vowels in the transcription to know how many syllables the word has. So the best way to know how many syllables a word has is to transcribe this word phonetically. يبقى السيلابل بكل بساطة عبارة عن مقطع صوتي. مقطع صوتي جوه الكلمة. طب المقطع الصوتي ده بنعرفه ازاي؟ هو عبارة عن الفاول اللي موجود جوه الكلمة. بمعنى ان احنا لما بنعمل phonetic transcription للكلمة بيبقى فيها vowels و consonants. احنا بنعد الفاولز، كل فاول عبارة عن syllable. ما بنعدش الفاولز اللي في الكلمة نفسها لكن اللي في الترانسكريبشن بتاع الكلمة. فعشان نعرف عدد السيلابلز الموجودة في الكلمة، يا إما بنعملها phonetic transcription أو بنحاول ننطقها صح، وبالتالي نقسم الفاولز اللي بتتنطق. For example, there are two syllables in water. If we transcribe the word water, we will find that it has two syllables, this one and this one, and they correspond to the two vowels that are present in the word, the A and the E. But as you can see in the phonetic transcription, the A is not actually an A, it's an O sound, water. And there are three syllables in meaningful. As you can see, the word meaningful has four written vowels. But in the phonetic transcription of the word, we only have three vowels because the E and the A are pronounced as one vowel. So the phonetic transcription provides us with the vowels that we actually utter, the vowels that we pronounce, not the vowels that are present in the word. This is why we can't just count the vowels that are in the word and say, for example, that meaningful has 4 syllables. No, we have to provide a phonetic transcription of the word, or we have to pronounce the word correctly and write down the vowels that we have actually uttered. يبقى زي ما واضح قدامكم من خلال المثالين دول، في كلمة water كان في الكلمة المكتوبة قدامنا 2 vowels، وفي الترانسكريبشن كان برضو في 2 vowels. بس لو ناخد بالنا الفاولز اللي في الترانسكريبشن غير الفاولز اللي في الكلمة، فعشان كده ما ينفعش مجرد نشوف الكلمة نعد الفاولز اللي فيها ونقول مثلا إن هنا في 2 syllables، لأن بيحصل أحيانا في كلمة مثلا زي meaningful إن قدامنا 4 vowels اللي هما ال E وال A وال I وال U، لكن لما بنيجي ننطقها بيبقوا 3 فقط، يعني ال E وال A بتتنطق كفاول واحد اللي هو ال long I sound meaningful. فعلشان نعرف الكلمة فيها كام مقطع صوتي أو كام فاول إحنا بننطقه، لإما نكتب الترانسكريبشن الخاص بالكلمة أو ننطقها صح ونشوف هي متقسمة كام فاول، بمعنى نطقنا كام فاول مش كام فاول مكتوب قدامنا. By the end of the lecture I will provide a link for a YouTube video that explains the rules of syllables, or how to count syllables without having to write a phonetic transcription of the word. يعني لو شايفين إن phonetic transcription صعب علشان نحدد كام syllable، ففي فيديو بيشرح مجموعة من القواعد اللي ممكن من خلالها نعرف كام syllable موجود جوه الكلمة من غير ما نلجأ للphonetic transcription. لكن حاليا كل اللي لازم تعرفوه إن السيلبل هو عبارة عن الفاول اللي احنا بننطقه جوه الكلمة، وإن مش لازم الفاولز المكتوبة تبقى هي نفسها الفاولز اللي احنا بننطقها. So how can we stress a syllable? To stress a syllable we just change the pitch. Here the stressed syllable is men in amended. So what did I do to stress the syllable? I changed the pitch of my voice. غيرت نبرة صوتي. يبقى عشان أعمل stress على مقطع صوتي لازم أغير نبرة صوتي، أحط stress وأنا بنطق. amended. فأي كلمة فيها أكتر من syllable بيبقى فيها مقطع صوتي stressed ومقطع صوتي unstressed. So in order to know the stressed syllable in a word, you need to pronounce it correctly. If you get stuck with a word, look it up and the dictionary will tell you what the stressed syllable is. In the phonetic transcription, the apostrophe, which looks like this, comes before the syllable that should be stressed. So, for example, if we take the word apple, here the stress is on the first syllable. يعني لو في كلمة وقفت معانا، لو أنا مش متأكد من النطق الصحيح للكلمة بلجأ للديكشنري وبشوف الفوناتيك ترانسكريبشن. في الفوناتيك ترانسكريبشن دايما في apostrophe اللي هي الشرطة اللي قدامكم دي اللي بتبقى فوق. الapostrophe دي بتيجي قبل stressed syllable، ففي كلمة زي كلمة apple الستريس على المقطع الأول مش المقطع التاني، يعني ما ينفعش مثلا أنطقها apple، لأ الصح هو apple، الستريس على المقطع الأول. فممكن نلجأ للphonetic transcription علشان نعرف الstressed syllable فين. So let's explore metrical feet. Number 1, the iambic foot. The first foot that we are going to talk about is the iamb or the iambic foot. The iambic foot consists of one unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. This sign usually signifies an unstressed syllable. It's shaped like a U, and this sign usually signifies a stressed syllable. يبقى العلامة الأولى للمقطع الصوتي اللي احنا ما بنحطش عليه الستريس، والعلامة التانية بتبقى للمقطع الصوتي اللي بنحط عليه الستريس. So let's see an example of an iambic foot. Employ. So the first part is unstressed and the second one is stressed. يعني لو ركزنا في طريقة النطق employ هنلاقي إن الأو ساوند عليه ستريس، فبكده هيبقى iambic foot لأن الستريس جه في المقطع التاني من الكلمة. Then we have the trochee or the trocaic foot. A trochaic foot is the opposite of the iambic foot. It consists of a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable. An example of a trochaic foot would be singer. Here the stress is on the first syllable and the last syllable is unstressed. يبقى كله طبعا معتمد جدا على نطق الكلمات. Then we have the anapest or the anapestic foot. It consists of two unstressed syllables followed by a stressed syllable. So it's like interrupt. Here the stress is on the very last syllable, rupt, while the first two syllables are unstressed. The opposite of the anapest is a dactyl or a dactylic foot. It consists of one stressed syllable followed by two unstressed syllables. An example would be absently. Here the stress is on the first syllable, absently. And then we have the spondee or the spondaic foot. It consists of two stressed syllables. An example would be bookmark. So here both syllables are stressed. The opposite of the spondee is the Pyrrhic foot. It consists of two unstressed syllables. An example would be to, a. Usually articles and prepositions are unstressed. ناخد بالنا إن الأيامبيك trochaic, anapestic, dactylic, spondaic and pyrrhic are adjectives. يعني لازم يجوا قبل كلمة foot قبل النون. لو عايزين نتكلم عن الفوت لوحده بنقول النون الخاص بيهم اللي هو هيبقى Iamb, Trochee, Anapest, Dactyl, Spondee وبيريك هيفضل زي ما هو سواء noun أو adjective بيبقى Pyrrhic. So these are the metrical feet: the iambic, trochaic, anapestic, dactylic, spondaic and Pyrrhic. And you just have to pronounce the word or the sentence out loud in order to determine how many syllables are there and whether they are stressed or not. يبقى عشان نعرف التفعيلة اللي مكتوبة بيها القصيدة لازم ننطق السطر كله، نشوف كل جملة مكتوبة ازاي. طبعا احنا بنبص على مستوى السطر مش مستوى الكلمة، وكل فوت فيهم بيبقى مرتبط بميتر معين، بمعنى إن لو الأيامبيك فوت اتكرر في السطر الشعري 5 مرات فده هيبقى اسم معين، لو اتكرر 4 مرات هيبقى ليه اسم تاني وهكذا. فده هيوضح جدا في الميتر أو طول السطر الشعري. فانتوا مفروض بس تعرفوا ترتيب الstressed والunstressed syllables في كل فوت. Now we move to the meter or line lengths. Number 1 we have a monometer, which is 1 foot per line, as mono means 1. An example of this would be Robert Herrick's Upon His Departure Hence. Thus I pass by and die as one unknown and gone. So, as you can see, I have capitalized some words or some parts of words, and these capitalized words or capitalized parts of words are stressed syllables. They are of course not capitalized in the poem, but I have capitalized them to highlight that they are stressed. Thus I, here the stress is on I, so it's unstressed, stressed, so this means that it's an iambic foot. Pass by, again unstressed, stressed, and die, unstressed, stressed, as one, unstressed, stressed, and so on. All of the lines are written in the iambic foot, and each line has only one iambic foot, so it's a monometer. يبقى زي ما انتوا شايفين بكل بساطة بنمسك السطر، هنا السطر قصير جدا مكون من كلمة أو كلمتين، بنشوف ايه الفوت اللي موجود، ايه التفعيلة اللي ماشية، الستريس بيتحط على انهي سيلبل. هنا في كل اللاينز كان الستريس على السيلبل اللي هو التاني، وما كانش فيه غير 1 فوت في كل لاين، يعني هنا iambic فوت واحد. وهكذا في كل سطر فيه iambic foot واحد فقط، عشان كده اسمه iambic monometer. Then we have Dimeter, which is a meter that consists of 2 feet per line. An example would be Robert Frost's Dust of Snow. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree. As you can see, each line includes 2 feet. For example, line number 1, the way, unstressed, stressed. So this is an iambic foot, and then a crow, unstressed, stressed, another iambic foot. So there are 2 iambic feet in the same line. طبعا العلامة الزرقاء اللي قدامكم دي زيها زي الكابيتالايزد words، مش موجودة في القصيدة. يعني القصيدة الأصلية ما فيهاش العلامة الزرقاء والكلمات كلها مكتوبة عادي، لكن أنا كاتبة الكلمات بالكابيتال letters علشان تعرفوا إن الستريس موجودة على الكلمة دي أو المقطع ده. والشرطة الزرقاء أو العلامة الزرقاء دي معناها إن اللي قبليها فوت واللي بعديها فوت، لأن زي ما انتوا شايفين في كل سطر فيه 2 feet، يعني shook down، unstressed, stressed, on me, unstressed, stressed. So each line includes 2 iambic feet. So the poem is written in iambic dimeter. Then we have trimeter, which is 3 feet per line. We have this example: when here the spring we see, fresh green upon the tree. In the first line we have unstressed, stressed. So this is an iambic foot. The spring again, unstressed, stressed, another iambic foot. We see, unstressed, stressed, a third iambic foot. So the poem is written in iambic trimeter. Tetrameter. Tetrameter is a meter that includes 4 feet per line. An example would be Christopher Marlowe's The Passionate Shepherd to His Love. Come live with me and be my love, and we shall all life's pleasures prove. Here again we have an iambic foot. Come live with me and be my love. The stress is always on the second syllable. And in the first line we have 4 iambic feet. Come live with me and be my love. So it's iambic tetrameter. Moving on to the pentameter, which is a meter that consists of 5 feet per line. A great example would be William Shakespeare's Sonnet 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. This sonnet is written in iambic pentameter. Again, we have an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. Shall I, the stress is on I, and shall I is 1 iambic foot. Compare. Compare is 1 word, but it has 2 syllables. So the first part of the word is unstressed and the second one is stressed. So this is an iambic foot. Thee too. Thee is unstressed and two is stressed. A summer's day. The word summer consists of 2 syllables, so it's divided. We have 1 foot, a sum, and mer's day. This is another iambic foot. So if we count the feet in the first line, we will find that it's made up of 5 iambs or 5 iambic feet. So it's written in iambic pentameter. An iambic pentameter is very common in English literature, especially in sonnets. Then we have hexameter, which is 6 feet per line, and an example would be Henry Longfellow's Evangeline. What I am going to read right now is the first line only. This is the forest primeval, the murmuring pines and the hemlocks. He used the dactylic foot, which consists of 1 stressed syllable followed by 2 unstressed syllables. So if we read it again, this is the. Here the stress is on this, and then 2 unstressed syllables. This is 1 dactylic foot. Forest pry. Again, one stressed syllable followed by two unstressed syllables. And then the rest of primeval, meval, and the, me, is stressed and then two unstressed syllables. And so on. You will find that he used the dactylic foot 6 times in the same line, because this is just one line. So the poem is written in dactylic hexameter. Moving on to heptameter or septameter, which is 7 feet per line. An example would be Lord Byron's Youth and Age, and this is just one line of the poem. Or could I feel as I have felt, or be what I have been? Here the poem is written in iambic heptameter, unstressed, stressed. Oh, could I feel as I. The stress is always on the second syllable, and it's written in iambic heptameter because, as you can see, he used 7 iambic feet per line. Lastly, we have the octameter, which is 8 feet per line. Upon a nest a bird I saw that had a bracelet in its beak. As you can see, this is one line and it's written in iambic octameter. Unstressed, stressed. Since the U is capital because it's the first letter in the line, I have written the stressed syllable in bold. So here the A sound in upon is unstressed, and then we have on, which is stressed, unstressed, stressed. A nest, unstressed, stressed. A bird, unstressed, stressed, and so on. You will find that he used 8 iambic feet per line, so the poem is written in iambic octameter. So this is the meter of the poem. So when it comes to meter, you need to know important things. Number 1, any poem includes a dominant meter. The dominant meter is the meter that runs throughout most of the poem. This means that a poem could be written in iambic pentameter, but it may include a spondaic foot or a trochaic foot. فالدوميننت ميتر ده الميتر اللي متداول فيه معظم القصيدة، لكن ده مش معناه إن كل كلمة في القصيدة مكتوبة بالميتر ده، بمعنى إن بيبقى فيه حاجة اسمها metrical variations, metrical inversions, metrical substitutions. The poet uses metrical variations in order to highlight the key words of the poem or to emphasize his theme. فمثلا لو عندنا قصيدة كلها مكتوبة بأيامبيك بنتامتر لكن الشاعر استخدم في كلمتين مثلا Turkic foot instead of an iambic foot. في الحالة دي هو أكيد استخدم metrical variation ده أو metrical inversion أو metrical substitution علشان يجذب القارئ، علشان القارئ يركز على الكلمات دي، وبالتالي أكيد في سبب أو غرض معين الشاعر عايزه، فدي وسيلة لجذب انتباه القارئ. فمش بالضرورة إن كل القصيدة تبقى موحدة مكتوبة بنفس الميتر، لأ عادي إن يبقى فيها metrical variations. Some poems are written in blank verse. Blank verse is unrhyming verse written in iambic pentameter. So this means that the poem doesn't have any rhyme، يعني مفيش قافية، but it's written in iambic pentameter. This means that it has 5 feet per line, but the lines don't rhyme together. يعني كل سطر فيه تفعيلة اللي هي iambic pentameter لكن ما فيهوش قافية. It was introduced to English literature in the 16th century by the Earl of Surrey, Henry Howard. This is Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, and he introduced this blank verse to English literature. Let's see an example from William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. But soft what light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. As you can see, each line includes one unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. But soft, one iambic foot. What light, another iambic foot. Through yonder. Through and yon in yonder is stressed. So through yon, a third iambic foot. The last part of the word yonder, der, and then the first part of the word window, win. Here it's unstressed, stressed, a fourth iambic foot. And then the last part of the word window and the word breaks, unstressed, stressed, a fifth iambic foot. So the line includes 5 iambic feet. This means that it's written in iambic pentameter. But the lines don't rhyme. As you can see, breaks, sun. There is no rhyme between these two words. يبقى مفيش قافية. يعني هو محافظ على التفعيلة لكن مفيش قافية. بمعنى إن آخر كلمة في السطر ما فيهاش قافية تتوافق مع آخر كلمة في سطر تاني. فده كان البلانك فيرس وكان منتشر في الرينيسانس. We also have free verse. And by the way, most poems today use free verse. What is free verse? Free verse poetry is poetry that lacks a consistent rhyme scheme, metrical pattern, or musical form. So this means that the poem doesn't use any rhyme and he doesn't use any meter or any musical form. It's as if the poem is written in prose, not verse. يبقى بكل بساطة إن القصيدة ملهاش قافية، ملهاش تفعيلة، ملهاش طول سطر شعري معين، لأ مكتوبة كده كأنها نثر. ومعظم الشعر حاليا مكتوب بفري verse. Free verse became prominent in the 19th century. The American poet Walt Whitman is considered the father of free verse, as his collection of poetry, Leaves of Grass, is written in free verse. So Walt Whitman is the pioneer or the father of free verse because his volume of poetry, Leaves of Grass, was one of the first volumes that were written in free verse. A well-known example of a poem that is written in free verse is E. E. Cummings' I Carry Your Heart With Me, I Carry It in My Heart. Let's look at the first stanza of the poem. I carry your heart with me, I carry it in my heart, I am never without it. Anywhere I go, you go, my dear, and whatever is done by only me is your doing, my darling. As you can see, there is no fixed meter and no fixed rhyme in these lines. Even the lines themselves don't look like the typical poetry lines. And the words don't include punctuation. For example, the I isn't capitalized. And there are commas and full stops that are missing. So this is a well-known example of free verse. You can Google the rest of the poem. Let's move to the rhyme scheme. I have included a very simple example that most of you know, which is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Let's examine the lines. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Here we have star and R. They rhyme together. يبقى في قافية ما بينهم. The first line of each poem takes the letter A. So if another line rhymes with it, it also takes the letter A. يبقى احنا ماشيين بالترتيب الأبجدي. أول سطر في القصيدة دايما بياخد حرف ال A. يعني آخر كلمة خالص بتاخد حرف ال A. دي بتبقى القافية الخاصة بلاين رقم 1. لو في أي لاين آخر كلمة فيه ليها نفس القافية بتاعت السطر الأول هتاخد برضو حرف ال A. Let's continue with the poem. Up above the word so high, like a diamond in the sky. High and sky. They rhyme together. But do they rhyme with star and R? No, they don't. So we will have to use another letter. In this case, we will use the letter B because it's alphabetically right after A. So the rhyme scheme of these 4 lines will be AABB. يبقى الرايم سكيم سهلة جدا. احنا بنشوف السطر الأول آخر كلمة فيه القافية بتاعتها ايه. لو هي A يبقى أي لاين في نهايته كلمة ليها نفس قافية السطر ده هيبقى نفس الحرف اللي هو A. أول ما نلاقي سطر نهايته قافية غير القافية اللي في لاين رقم 1 هنديله letter B، وأي سطر هيمشي مع نفس قافية السطر ده هياخد letter B. لما تقابلنا قافية تالتة خالص هتاخد C، وهكذا هنفضل ماشيين بالترتيب الأبجدي. الرايم سكيم سهلة جدا واحنا بنحددها من خلال القصيدة، بنشوف كل سطر وآخر السطر قافية ماشية مع سطر تاني ولا لأ، فدي بتبقى واضحة جدا. يعني الرايم سكيم أسهل من الريزم. Moving on to the stanzaic structure أو تقسيمة المقاطع. What is a stanza? It's a group of lines forming the basic recurring metrical unit in a poem. فهي بكل بساطة مجموعة من الأبيات. Stanzas in poetry are similar to paragraphs in prose. Both stanzas and paragraphs include connected thoughts and are set off by a space. So, in poetry, we don't use paragraphs, we use stanzas. And a stanza is similar to a paragraph. It includes connected thoughts, and we usually leave a space after each stanza. So, if we look at the poem before us, Snow Day. In the winter, it's every kid's dream. As snowflakes begin to appear, that suddenly there will be a blizzard and they will cancel school for the year. This is the first stanza. And then we have a space, and then we have another stanza, and another space, and a third stanza. So a stanza is simply a group of lines. And you can always detect the stanza through looking at the spaces between the lines. I would also like to share with you what the contemporary poet Nikita Gill wrote about stanzas. She says, I have always loved that stanza means room in Italian. It makes me think of poems like they are houses built from words and memory. It's like the poet invites the reader into their poem house and says, welcome, make yourself at home. So she says that stanza means room in Italian. And if a poem is made of stanzas or rooms, then it's like a house that is made from words and memory, the memory of the poet. And when the poet writes this poem and readers read it, it's like he is saying, welcome, make yourself at home. When you read a poem, it's like you have entered the house of the poet because you get a glimpse of his emotions, his feelings, his thoughts. So we have several types of stanzas, and each type depends on how many lines the stanza consists of. Number 1, we have monostage. It's a stanza of one line, and it's very rare to find a monostage in English poetry. Number 2, a couplet, which is a stanza of 2 lines. Number 3, a tercet, which is a stanza of 3 lines. Number 4, quatrain, which is a stanza of 4 lines. Number 5, a quintet or a cinquain, which is a stanza of 5 lines. Number 6, a sestet, which is a stanza of 6 lines. And number 7, a septet, which is a stanza of 7 lines. And lastly, number 8, an octave, which is a stanza of 8 lines. So the stanzaic structure is quite simple. We just count the lines in each stanza, and then we determine the type of stanza. So if we go back to the poem Snow Day, we will see that it's made of 3 quatrains, because each stanza is made up of 4 lines. So each stanza is a quatrain. Okay, so you just count the lines in each stanza. I have compiled a list of book references that could help you understand what we have talked about more. We have Poetry Handbook, a dictionary of terms, Poetry 101, The Art of Poetry, How to Read a Poem, The Poet's Dictionary, the Princeton Handbook of Poetic Terms, and we have 2 literary dictionaries that might help you with the literary terms found in this lecture. The concise Oxford Dictionary of Literary Terms and the Routledge Dictionary of Literary Terms. You can find a link to download the books in the description below. I have also compiled a list of YouTube videos that you can check out to get a clearer understanding of a certain point in the lecture. So the first video is about the pleasure of poetic pattern, how poetry with its rhythm and rhyme delights us. And then we have the types of poetry, lyric poetry, narrative poetry, and dramatic poetry. We also have a very important video, Scansion 101. In this video, the speaker explains how you can determine the meter and the foot of each poem. Another important video is this one, What is meter in poetry? The speaker explains the different types of meter. So if you don't want to check this video, you can check this one. There are also 2 videos about the rhythm and the rhyme and the meter of the poem. They are quite simple and they explain how we can determine the rhythm and the rhyme of the poem. We also have a video about the 4 basic metrical feet. There are also 3 very important videos about syllables. So we first need to understand what a syllable is, and this video explains it perfectly. And then we need to understand how to find syllables in poems, the rules that will help us find syllables without having to resort to the phonetic transcription of the word. So this video is quite important. And this is yet another video that explains what a syllable is and a website about syllables. There's also a website that provides a phonetic transcription of sentences and paragraphs. You just need to input your text on the website and it will provide you with the phonetic transcription of the whole text. So for example, you can copy the text of the poem and look at the phonetic transcription of the whole poem. This will help you identify the same vowels, the same syllables. It will also help you to identify the stressed and unstressed syllables. You can find them in a comment below. So I have compiled a list of important extra resources that will help you understand the points that we have discussed in this lecture. Number 1, and this is the most important document, the rhythm. It includes a detailed explanation of the rhythm, the metrical feet, the free verse, the blank verse. So you need to download the file and check out more examples. You will also find a file on diction and on tone. And finally, you will find a file about some types of poetry, such as the sonnet, the ballad, and the elegy. You can find the link in the description below. Lastly, we have 2 important resources on sonnets. We have lit charts. You can check the definition of the word sonnets on lit charts, and you can check the different types of sonnets on masterclass. This is it for today. Thank you for watching this lecture. Stay tuned for our next lecture.